Spouses of an identical twin. What was your most embarrassing moment with the other twin? My mum's a twin. I've caught her waving to mirrors in clothing stores a number of times thinking her sister is also there. In my younger years, I'd often run to my auntie when I wanted to ask my mum something. Especially when she was at our house making coffee in the kitchen or something. A guy I work with has a twin brother who lives across the country. He took a video when he introduced his 2-year-old son to his twin brother for the first time. The moment that kid saw his uncle, his eyes just got huge and he kept looking back and forth. You could see his tiny brain explode and then he just started crying. My husband and his identical twin were wearing similar clothes and they looked the same from behind. I hugged the wrong one. Awkward, but in the end not a huge deal. Not S-twin myself, but my brother and I look a lot alike. To the point, when we were in our 20s, that people mistook us for each other. I was out visiting my brother and his wife. We were getting back from a day trip and his wife said she's going to take a bath. In a way that it was obvious to me that she wanted him to join her. Well, we go inside. I start emptying the car and taking stuff back into the kitchen when I hear my sister-in-law right behind me say, "So I guess I'm taking my bath alone." I just stand there trying not to laugh before answering, "I think you have the wrong brother." She and I both burst out loud laughing. Still awkward, but it was funny. He ducked my girlfriend. He later ducked the woman I thought I wanted to marry. We haven't spoken in 5 years, but he comes up in conversation a lot. Like in awkward small talk when the clerk or the train ticket guy asks what brother I am and proceeds to ask how he is. Not my most embarrassing moment, but something close. I frequent a bar every week. All the servers know me and know my husband, who doesn't come every week but comes enough that our regular waitress knows who he is. One evening, husband's identical twin brother and 8-month pregnant wife go to the bar for dinner. Cue several servers giving them some intense side-eye and pretty terrible, downright rude service. Brother-in-law says something like, "Huh, that's weird. Twin always says they have the best service here." Pretty sure idle M becomes every week to his wife. His wife starts laughing and comments to the server, "Hey, I think you know my husband's twin and his wife. They come here every week." The service greatly improved after that. So my ex-GF and her twin shared a place. I thought my ex was in the shower. The shower had opaque doors on it so you couldn't really see who was inside the shower, but you could still see a silhouette of a woman that looked just like your girlfriend at the time. Anyway, I just got there to their home and had to use the bathroom. I rushed in. Did a number 2 with all the bells and whistles. She slid open the shower door and said, "WTF are you doing?" My jaw just dropped to the ground. I was speechless. Thankfully I was done. Turns out my ex was in the backyard sitting by the pool. My granddad was an identical twin. He was in the Irish Army. His twin Eddie was not in the army. Eddie's daughter got a tattoo of Eddie on her leg. It's a big tattoo of him in his full army uniform. Nobody has the heart to tell her it's not her dad. I taught twins. I didn't notice I was teaching twins for a month. In my defense, I can't see faces well and everyone looks the same. My mother has an identical twin. My aunt obviously, so this is a story about my aunt's spouse. Apparently sent, among many other things, has a genetic component. So an oddity we discovered in my childhood is that our family dog, a cute miniature schnauzer, was completely unable to tell my mother and my aunt apart. When my aunt would come over to visit, our dog would walk in the room, look back and forth between them and just whine for a while. The world was apparently very confusing when there were 2 human mommies. On the plus side, this meant when we went out of town we could just leave our dog with my aunt and the dog settled in perfectly happy. The location was strange, but human mommy was there so everything was alright. Right up until my uncle tried to get in bed with his wife. Then our dog would immediately growl, bark and try to drive away the intruder with all his miniature might. My aunt thought it was hysterical, but for some reason my uncle didn't find this quite as funny. In high school my BF was an identical twin. They'd do tricks at parties. Switch clothes act. It was funny if you knew the trick. Or them. But everyone else was annoyed. One party, me and BF's twins GF decided to get them wrong on purpose. We agreed we'd just keep going. They'd hate it. They weren't big on sharing at the best of times. We waited for the inevitable switch. And then went after them. For the first minute. They played it as they were the other. Until the GF and I started to hint at a little privacy act. They stopped with that trick after that. Edit, sorry about the act. It's sorta correct cause I'm on mobile. My mom is a twin and her poodle loves everyone. But she can't stand my mom's twin. Barks. Growls. Hides and bites. Only person she does this with. And my aunt is a dog person. Dogs love her. Mandatory, I am not a spouse, but when I was 17 I dated one from a set of identical twin girls. Their parents were of the school of thought that one must have one of whatever the other had. So as a consequence, and completely predictable, they would pretend to be the other for fun. We were swimming at a lake near the town we lived in, and they showed up in identical bathing suits, jewelry, purses, flip-flops, towels, cell phones, watches, and food. We started swimming, and as teenagers are absolutely disgusting, started to fool around. I thought I was kissing my girlfriend when she laughed, pulled away and said, "You're right, he does use too much tongue." My budding erection vanished in embarrassment. And I was so confused I wouldn't touch either of them until they agreed to drink different beverages so I could keep track. My girlfriend wasn't mad. And in a sight being 20/20 I should have just gone with it. But I did not. I left as soon as possible because they kept alternately teasing me, in a physical sort of way, and then changing drinks. Teenage me couldn't handle that kind of pressure. My wife and I found out that her identical twin was a stripper when a bunch of my fraternity brothers went to the strip club and all started calling and texting me to ask if anything was wrong. And if I knew where my wife was. Not a twin. But my dad and I seemed to be indistinguishable on the phone. Back when I lived at home there was a girl who was a bit stalkery and often called on the landline, no mobile phones back then, to tell me what weird sex shit she would do to me if I was there right now. Of course. One time my dad picks up the phone. She goes on and on what she would do to me. Until after a good couple minutes my dad just said, "Yeah. I guess you wanted to talk to my son. Right?" That was the last time she called. Thankfully. So. Thanks, Dad. Not a spouse, but so. Briefly dated a twin when I was in my early 20s. She lived with her sister. I slept with the sister. Unknowingly. I was over. Waiting for the GF to stop by. The sister let me in and then left. Well. She left. Then came back. Announcing she was my GF. Very early on into the relationship and we had a very good time. She left soon after because work called. I had to go in. Needless to say, when my GF actually got home, I figured it out. Sexy times ensued again. I kept the secret. We broke up soon after. Unrelated. Sister immediately started texting me. So there's that. My boyfriend and his brother look insanely the same. His brother will walk around in the same slouchy position my boyfriend does when I come over. And all that really happens is I take a double take. Sometimes he cheats with the doors open and I blame my boyfriend, but it's him. Just wanna give some cred to OP for a good AskReddit subject. Hope this one gets some interesting replies. My missus and her sister have a bonfire night party for their birthday almost every year as the dates coincide. It was dark. She was facing the other way. I walked up behind her, put my arm around her waist and kissed her neck, then my missus walked out of the kitchen. My husband doesn't have a twin. But we were at a friend's wedding and we were standing around and talking to a few people. This part is important. My husband is 6 feet 0 inches and I am 5 feet 0 inches. At this point, we had a few beers and were feeling good. Out of habit, I leaned over and put my arm around my husband's back. and leaned up against him. My husband jumped back. And it was then I realized that my husband had left the circle minutes ago and I had just hugged a different tall man. I've now learned to look up and make sure my husband is next to me before caressing his back. Once I got greeted by a guy who mistook me with one of his friends. Then I met the friend. We've been calling each other brother ever since. I don't know if this counts, but my ex forgot her twin sister's birthday. I was quite impressed. When I'm over his house, I have to be very sure when I approach him from behind to hug him that I have the right one. From the back you just can't tell, lol. I casually dated an identical twin. The two of them were so similar that they were able, by switching hairstyles, which were pretty similar anyway, even fool their mother. And way, I had no problem telling them apart. And mine was the cuter one, in my eyes. But I was in my early 20s. So I probably tried to kiss the wrong one by accident about 30 times. I was not a good person when I was younger. I got identical twin brothers. They were arguing and one called the other ass face. It was funny after he realized they looked the same. My father is a twin. My mother has gotten dirty looks from strangers that know my uncle but not that he and my father are twins, thinking that we were some secret family. My aunt has attested to it happening to her as well. That's about it. It's pretty funny. My kids both kinda had their brains explode when they met my uncle for the first time. I posted this last week in another thread, but it fits better here. One time we went to play laser tag, seniors in high school. I was on a different team than both my GF and her twin sister. I ran up behind the twin, turned her around, picked her up by her ass and kissed her. Whoops. She and I never mentioned it to anyone. There was definitely a point where I realized it was the wrong twin. And that point came before the point where we stopped. My wife is not a twin, but her sister is only 11 months younger than her. They look really similar. And for about 5 years had a nearly identical haircut. The three of us drove up to the lake cabin that we were having a family vacation at. And the rest of the family was due to arrive in a few hours. I volunteered to unload the car, while my wife and her sister were changing into swimsuits to go hang out at the lake shore. I didn't know which room was going to be ours, and which was going to be her sister's, so I just took a guess. Quietly walked in with a few bags and there was what I thought was my wife, putting on her bikini top, but turned away from me. She dropped her bottoms and bent over to pick them up. I got a perfect view of a completely shaved vag and ass. I made a "whoa, you shaved!" exclamation, and she yelped. Turned around and it was my sister-in-law. She quickly ran into the bathroom and was laughing as she realized the mistake I had made. So I've seen my sister-in-law's entire undercarriage. Thankfully my wife is pretty understanding. My sister's husband is not a twin, but him and his brother could pass as twins. She said when they first got together she walked into the kitchen and smacked his brother's butt thinking it was him. When I was in high school I was dating a girl who had an identical twin. The girl I dated went to public school. The twin however went to a smaller school. Every once in a while they would swap places. Well, I wasn't informed of when it was happening. Imagine my surprise when I hopped in my girlfriend's car in the morning, leaned over to kiss her and boom, it's the sister. Posted it before. My ex-wife's sister stayed with us for a few months and for some reason liked to use our bathroom in the morning to get ready. One morning I walked in thinking it was my wife, lifted the towel she had wrapped around her and smacked the sheet out of her ass. It wasn't my wife. I haven't had anything embarrassing happen yet, but the answers here are definitely making me ducking paranoid. My next oldest sister was not my twin, but were often mistaken for twins. She was home from boot camp and I was getting ready for a date with my boyfriend. She was doing the bathrobe big bowl of ice cream thing in the kitchen. My boyfriend arrived. I opened the window of my bedroom and told him to come in. I was almost ready. I am upstairs in my bedroom and I hear her yelling and beating on someone. She'd been away She'd never met my boyfriend. He thought it was me in the kitchen. He said, "Oh, you aren't dressed yet," and reached from behind and put his hands on her bobs. She thought she was being assaulted and started screaming and hitting him and throwing things at him. She'd learned some skills in boot camp. I ran downstairs and she shouted for me to call the police, and he was cowering in the corner of the kitchen trying to explain. TLDR, my boyfriend thought my sister was me and ended up getting a beatdown of epic proportions. Dated an identical twin in college. At times, they suffered from what some call single personality syndrome. They would do everything together. All decisions were made together. Even simple things. They would wake up in the morning and say, "What are we wearing today?" just giving some context for the story. As I said, I dated this girl in college. Her and her sister lived together. Now, the entire time we dated, her sister was single. This, more or less, made her sister the third wheel in everything we did as a couple. It was like dating both of them without the perks of dating both of them. I know what you were thinking. One time, the three of us went on a short 4-day cruise in the Caribbean. On the ship, we kind of all did our own thing. One morning, I got up and went to the gym and the girls went to breakfast. When I got back to the room, I saw who I thought was my GF back in the bed. Thinking we had a brief moment of alone time, I climbed in the bed, spooned up behind her, started kissing her neck, and ran my hand up her shirt. She turns her head, and to my horror, I realize that it's her sister and not my GF. I quickly backed away and said, "OMG. Capital I am so sorry." She took it like a champ. She shrugged, smiled, and said it was bound to happen at some point. She also alluded to the fact that this might have happened before with guys that came before me. As far as I know, she never told my GF. And I sure as shit was not going to tell her. Married the wrong one. I have twin uncles and one of their wives suggested to the other wife that they should switch beds that night and see if the twins noticed. The other wife looked at her and burst out laughing and had to explain that's not how the look-alike thing worked. Not really the same, but this reminds me of a "that's not how this works" situation with an old baseball coach. There were 2 kids on the team with the same first name, Joe Smith and Joe Baker. On the uniforms, everyone had just their last names. But the Joes has J. Smith and J. Baker. When we asked why they had their first initial, coach said to tell them apart because they have the same first name. Not me, but someone I knew said that they have a back massage to their wife's triplet and then kissed her on the ear. We're not twins, but my brother and I look so similar it's scary. And usually wear very similar clothing. He recently got married. So over the course of the past year, I have almost been kissed, been hugged from behind, almost had my crotch grabbed, and had my ass slapped and fondled countless times. It's awkward every time.